In this video, we're going to have an in-depth look at the VCarve toolpath and how you can use all of its different options. VCarving is the easiest way to create really attractive decorative elements with a CNC. Whether you're using it for text or a graphic, it's really fast to both calculate it in the software and pretty quick to run on almost any CNC machine to ultimately give you what is a 3D look. It is important to try to understand how VCarving works. The depth of the cut is determined by the tool angle and the width of the vectors. VCarving can only be done with closed vectors, as it will run the tool directly in the center of the opposing vectors to a depth that the tool can fit and to a maximum pass depth. Here are some points that we need to think about that can affect the outcome of your VCarving. Flat material is essential because any variation will affect the perceived depth of your VCarving. And for the same reason above, be sure your machine is level, or more importantly, the surface you plan to secure your material to is true to your machine. Some users will surface the full spoil board, while others might cut a pocket in a temporary spoil board and insert their material into that. Another thing we need to make sure of is that you zero your machine accurately off the top of your material. This will mean that there is no need to accurately measure the thickness of the material and ensures that the tool enters and leaves the material where it should to create nice sharp points. We need to have an accurately sized tool. Even if your tool states it's 90 degrees, be sure that you measure that, because even if it's off by 1 degree, it will affect what you've seen in your software and how the end result will look on your CNC machine. Ensure that your tools have sharp points. This will also take away from the overall effect. Lastly, we need to make sure that we are using clean, closed vectors to VCarve, as this will ensure that we will have a nice, smooth VCarving result. Your vectors should not overlap, as this will make it unclear to the software which areas we want to VCarve. If you do have a design that requires overlapping vectors, you can create separate VCarving toolpaths which are ran in the order that you require them to be to achieve the effect that you're looking for. As you can see, I've already opened up our software and loaded in a file. This file is called the VCarve Toolpaths example, and in this file we have all kinds of different sheets that we're going to use across this tutorial to help illustrate all the different parts of the VCarve toolpath. But to start out with, let's take a look at the job setup for a standard VCarve only job. So if we go ahead and zoom out just a little bit, and we go ahead and take a look at our job setup. As soon as we click that, you'll see that all of a sudden we have all kinds of different sheets pop up, and that's reflected here in our job setup. This gives us an idea of what's happening across our whole project file. So we've got various widths and heights and thicknesses of material. We've got all kinds of different modeling resolutions across this particular project. So we're going to go ahead and cancel out of this because we really only want to know what's going on with this particular sheet. So if we go to our Sheets tab, we can go ahead and turn off all these other sheets. And with the Vectric text sheet selected, we can go ahead and just click Edit. And you'll see that the width is 20 inches, the height is 15, the thickness is 1 inch. And as with most toolpaths that have VCarving in it, you're going to be zeroing off your material surface. That way you're going to get a nice accurate start position on the top of your material. Our datum is set to the bottom left. And because this is a VCarve toolpath, we don't have any 3D content in this at the moment. So with this particular sheet, it's going to be set to standard, but as soon as we start to introduce some 3D content, you'll see that we'll move up to very high. Now, in our project file, we can have many different materials. In this case, we'll be using Canadian maple for this sheet, and that's perfectly fine. So we can just go ahead and click OK. Let's go back to our Design tab, and then let's flip over to our Toolpaths tab. Okay, as always, it's important to go in and check your material setup. Now, even though we're not going to cut these particular toolpaths, it's still a good habit to get into. So we're going to take a look at our material thickness. It's set to 1 inch. The datum is set to the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to be zeroing off our material surface. And again, this is really important when you're doing VCarving to make sure that you zero off the surface that you're going to be VCarving into if possible. That way you get a nice true measurement. We don't have any 3D content on this particular sheet, so we're just going to leave that where it is. And our rapid Z gaps and our home and start position are safe and appropriate for this machine. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. Let's go ahead and have a look at our VCarving toolpath. Okay, we're going to start at the very top of this form and work our way through. Now we're only going to look at the features that we need right now of this toolpath that are going to allow us to set up a very basic VCarve toolpath so we can see what's happening. And we'll get into some of the other features later on in this tutorial. So first of all, we can set up a start depth. Typically, this would be at the very top of your material, so 0 would be totally appropriate for this. But if you wanted to put your VCarving into a pocket, let's just say that you've already cut into your material, then you're going to want to reflect that pocket depth here. Now you notice that there isn't any cut depth in this particular toolpath. That's because the software is going to go ahead and force the V-bit as deep as it can between the two vectors that are right across from each other. So in this case, with the letter T, the V-bit will travel down the center until the sidewalls of the actual cutter hit these two vectors, and then it will stop going any deeper. But we give you the option of setting up a flat depth in case maybe you don't want it to go that deep and you want to kind of cap that off. Or in some cases, the distance between these two vectors will allow for your tool to go right through your material. So you're going to want to be careful of that, and you can control that with your flat depth. For right now, we're going to go ahead and choose a new V-bit. We don't want to use this 60-degree V-bit. We'd rather use the 90-degree V-bit to start out with. So we can go ahead into our tool database, making sure that we have the proper material selected and the proper machine selected so our feeds and speeds are safe and appropriate. And we'll use that 90-degree and we can select that. We're not going to bother to choose any clearance tools right now, so all these options have been grayed out, but we're going to touch on that later on in this tutorial. We're not going to use the vector start points, and we're not going to use the vector selection order. Again, we'll go to these a little bit later on in the tutorial, and we're not going to worry about projecting it onto a 3D model. There isn't one in this case, and we'll cover that a bit later. So all we're going to do is just rename this toolpath to reflect the tool that we've chosen, and we'll go ahead and click Calculate. Now there's no vector selected, so it's important to remember that you need to have a closed vector selected in order to be able to do any VCarving. So we're just going to go ahead and click OK. We'll zoom out a little bit and we'll choose this top vector, this top set of text, and we'll calculate that. Now as soon as we do that, we'll be brought into our 3D view where we can go ahead and preview our visible toolpath. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll zoom in a bit. And you can see on the letter T here that the software has forced that V-bit into the material until the sidewalls of that tool hit the edges. So you get these nice sort of V-looking channels cut into your material. And depending on how far away those vectors are, depends on how deep your tool is going to go. So you get a nice sort of variation of tool depth as you move around this particular T shape. That's the same for the C and the R. Now this works really, really well for when you have text that is separated. These are individual letters, and we'll show you in a little bit what happens when you have more of a scripty font and the things you need to sort of think about for that. So let's go ahead and close this down for a second, and let's just go ahead and look at our text in our 3D view. So we can turn on our vectors in our 3D view. We're going to set up a new VCarving toolpath, but in this case we're going to select the second set of text. We'll go in here, and the only thing we're going to change is just this tool. So we're going to go back to that 60-degree V-bit. We'll select that. We're going to again reflect that name in our toolpath name here, reflect the angle in our toolpath name, and we can calculate that. And then we'll preview that visible toolpath. And you'll see there's quite a difference between these two different toolpaths. This one is cutting much deeper because of course the angle is much smaller, so we can put that tool even deeper into your material to give you a much deeper cut if you would like. So I really suggest that you go ahead and play around with the different tools that you have on hand to see your best cuts. Okay, we're going to go ahead now and close this down. And the next thing we're going to explore is how the start depth can affect your VCarving. So we're going to go ahead and select this bottom text that we have here, which is the last set of lettering that we have. We'll go back into our VCarve toolpath, and we're going to give this a slight start depth. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to force our tool in a little bit deeper. And what the result of that will be is that we'll get slightly bolder lettering. So if you find that maybe your VCarving is a little weak and you want to just bold it up a bit more, then you can go ahead and use this little technique. But keep in mind that when you do that, your letters are also going to get closer together. So areas like here, where the R and the I come really close, they're going to get even closer. So you want to look out for things like that. So let's go ahead and give it a start depth of 0.02 of an inch. And we'll just recalculate that as it is. and then we'll preview that visible toolpath, and you'll see what happens now. It's barely noticeable, but we are getting a little bit closer here between the R and the I. So we can go back in that again if you'd like to, and we can just make that a little bit more. Let's double that. We'll recalculate that. We'll go ahead and undo our last preview, and then we're going to go ahead and preview this visible toolpath, and you'll see that again, it's getting even closer. But the letters are getting a little bit bolder. So if you only have one tool and you want to make things a little bit bolder, then this is one of those things that you might want to explore. Okay, now with that, we looked at the very basic set of features that we need to use from our VCarve toolpath strategy to give us some really nice, crisp looking text. Now it's important to remember that this is a serif font and they're individual letters. Things are a bit different, or you might get slightly different results when you use a font where the letters overlap, like a script style font. So let's go ahead and have a look at some examples and how we can fix any potential issues that you might have. So as you can see, we have 3 different words here. The top 2 are in exactly the same font, and the bottom one is in a more troublesome font, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. If I go ahead and select the top font and we zoom in on it, you're going to see that each individual letter overlaps just slightly, but the result is quite pleasing. There's nothing here that looks out of place. And that can be shown really easily if we go ahead and run a VCarve toolpath on this text. Before we do that, let's go ahead and have a look at our vector validator. So every so often, you're going to want to run your vector validator on your font or on your text that you're going to want to VCarve, or even any other vectors that you might want to use, just to make sure there aren't any errors in it. So if we go ahead and just search that selected text for any problems, you'll see that we do have some problems here. And these are some intersections. There's 10 different intersections here. Now, normally, we might want to take a closer look at these, but because it's a font and we're going to use it for VCarving, we can go ahead and turn our vector validator into the VCarving mode. So if we select that and then we research that, you're going to see that it's not going to show us those problem areas. That's because really when we do VCarving, they're not going to cause us any issues at all. So if we go ahead and close this down, and we go back over to our Toolpaths tab, we bring up our VCarve toolpath, you'll see that we have all the settings from the last one. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we choose that text, and we're going to go ahead and just simply go ahead and calculate that VCarving. If we preview that visible toolpath, you'll see that even where those letters overlap, things look really nice. There's no problem with that at all. Things look really clear, and I'm really quite happy with that. So good thing the vector validator has that VCarving mode, so we can see what is really going to affect our VCarving or not. Let's go ahead and look back down that again. Let's go ahead and close this down. We're going to go back over to our drawing tab for a second and have a look at our 2D view again. Now, the next bit of text we're going to look at is going to be the word software here. And if we zoom in and have a closer look at this, again, those letters overlap what looks to be quite nicely, but there is a bit of a situation here where the F and the T overlap. You'll see that there's a bit of a strange little jump here. And same with down here at the end where the A and the R kind of run into each other. Again, there's a strange little jump. Now let's just zoom out a second. Let's see how the vector validator deals with those sort of situations. We're just going to press F on our keyboard to recenter that. So let's select that, go into our vector validator. We'll search that, and you see that it comes up with the errors that we expected, but let's go into VCarving mode. And let's go ahead and search that again. It doesn't see any problems with those at all. But I have a feeling that when we go ahead and create some VCarving for this, we're going to see little issues here. So let's go ahead and close this down, and let's just verify my thoughts. So we'll press F again to center that. Let's go back over to our Toolpaths tab. Let's bring up the same toolpath we used a second ago. We're just going to go and select this different bit of text. We'll recalculate that. And let's preview that visible toolpath. And as I suspected, you'll see that when the F and the T run together, there's a bit of a wall here. And same with down here where the A and the R run together. Now, to be fair, this might not be a bad thing in the end, but I just want to show you how you can get rid of this in case you have like a big font. If this was really small, it probably wouldn't matter. But if this is going to be big and on a big sign, then this could potentially be a huge issue for you. And to remove that by hand could be quite difficult. So let's just go ahead and undo that toolpath preview. Let's close this down. Let's pop back over to our design tab for a moment and back into our 2D view. Unlike our last one, we're going to need to go in and do a little bit of editing. Let's just go ahead and weld that text together. Because this is a font, it's going to give us the option to replace this font with an actual vector version of it, or we can go ahead and keep a copy as a font. It's totally up to you how you do this. You may want to keep a copy of the font version around in case you have a spelling mistake. It makes it a little bit easier to edit, but in my case, I don't need to worry about that, so I'm just going to go ahead and choose replace. And then we'll zoom in on those trouble areas that we saw. And again, you're going to see that there's a little bit of a step there, which we kind of expected. And over here, there's a step as well. Now you can go ahead and run your VCarving on that, and it's going to remove that little wall that you have, but there'll be a little bit of a jog in the side of that. So let's go ahead and fix that. So we're going to go and select that text, which is now vector, go into node mode, just find those little nodes, and we're just going to smooth that out just a little bit so we get a better result in the end. So zip over here to the A and the R, and we're going to do the same here again. We'll just pull those down like that. And there we go. So now what we're going to do is go back to our pick tool, press F on our keyboard again to focus on that sheet. We'll go back to our Toolpaths tab, double click on that VCarve toolpath. We're going to select this text. We'll calculate that, and we'll preview that visible toolpath, and we'll see the results. They look much better than before. There isn't that wall there. It's a nice smooth transition between all those letters, and that looks fantastic. Let's go ahead and look back down on that. Let's close this. Go back over to our design tab for a moment and to our 2D view, and let's have a look at the art text at the bottom here. Let's just zoom in on that text and have a quick peek at it. There are some transitions here between some letters, and they look pretty nice actually with this font, the way they are right now. But if we choose this and we go into our draw text tool and we choose, instead of just leaving it as its regular font style, we bold it, you'll see that those errors are now compounded and they look a lot worse now than what they did before. So if we wanted to choose to VCarve this font as a bold font, then we've got some things that we need to work out. We've already looked at how we can fix things like this, but it's things over here like this little area here, this area there's another one there, and up here that we need to kind of take a closer look at. So let's close this down, and we're going to use our vector validator again. This is always super handy. We'll search it without the VCarving mode turned on, and we've got those areas showing up that we kind of expected, along with some of these new areas here. Let's switch it over to VCarving mode and search it again, and it's going to remove some of those because again, this really isn't an error per se. It just doesn't look all that nice. We just need to have a look at the problem areas here that are left over. So these 4 areas here we'll take a closer look at. So let's close this down and let's weld this text together. And again, we are going to replace the text with the curved version of it, and we're just going to off click this. And if we go ahead and have a peek at like this area here, you'll see that little area right there. Now that we've welded it together, it's actually just a floating thing that we can delete. And this one up here is exactly the same. So we can go ahead and delete that as well. Whereas this one here is not that way. So if we go into node mode, we'll have to go in and actually do a little bit of editing to fix this. And you'll see that right there, we need to actually cut this. So we can right click, go down to cut, right click, and we can go down to cut. We can delete out this extra bit we don't need. Reselect this curve. We can grab those 2 nodes. We can right click and we can say close those vectors with a smooth curve. So we can fix that one just like that. Zoom out again. Let's have a look over here at this one here. See if we can do anything with this one. It's the same sort of thing. So we just need to right click and choose cut, or we can just hover over the node and just press C on my keyboard. Let's delete that bit. Reselect this, grab those 2 nodes that are really close to each other, right click, we'll join those or close those with a smooth curve. That fixes that problem. So as you can see, with a little bit of node editing, you can go ahead and fix up your text so that you're going to achieve some really nice VCarving. Now don't forget, when you go to run this back through your VCarve toolpath, that you select all of the parts of your text. Now let's have a look at adding a clearance tool to your VCarving toolpath. So we're going to use these vectors to illustrate how we can add a clearance tool to our VCarve toolpath to help save us time when we're removing a lot of material. In this particular case, we want to remove the material between the words Flying Scotsman and the inside border of this sign. So just go ahead and jump over to our Toolpaths tab, and we're going to go ahead and bring up our VCarve toolpath. You might be asking yourself, why am I using a V-bit toolpath to cut out this material between the text and this inside border instead of just using a regular old pocket toolpath? Well, I want to be able to use the geometry of the V-bit to get nice sharp corners on all the edges and all of the internal corners of my text. And a V-bit is just the right tool for that job. We're going to select in the 2D view the Flying Scotsman text and this inside border. We're going to have a start depth of 0, and we're going to add in a flat depth for this because we want to have a nice flat bottom in the background here. Our V-bit tool is going to be a 60-degree V-bit, and we're going to use a clearance tool, and it's going to be our 1/8 inch end mill. So when we calculate this toolpath, we're going to end up having two toolpaths come out of this, one for our V-bit and one for our end mill. So let's just go ahead and calculate that, and we'll see what we come up with. So if we go ahead and tile our views, you'll see that in our 2D view, we can turn on our solid toolpath preview. And over in our toolpaths list, we can go ahead and hide this second toolpath that was just created for us. So the first one shows us where the 1/8 inch end mill will get to. So it'll clear out all this material inside of here. And then when we go in and add in our V-bit, it's going to remove the excess material for us. So running these two toolpaths, one after each other with a bit change, unless you have an automatic tool changer, is going to save you a lot of time in the end instead of just using that one V-bit to clear all that material out. Okay, we should also take a look at our toolpath preview. So we're just going to preview our visible toolpaths. If I maximize this 3D view, that we have nice clean pockets here, and then you can see where the V-bit is going to actually do all of the clearing for us. They also give us a nice surface finish, and then we just need to go in and do a little bit of a cleanup in here. Now, to be fair, we could go back to our toolpath again, and we can add in another clearance tool, maybe a 1/16 inch, and that would get some of that, would remove some of that material out of there as well. Now, remember that if we have this tool selected, you can go ahead and decide whether you like to use an offset tooling or a raster tooling, depending on your needs. You can add in extra clearance tools, and you can also order those if you would like. We can add in ramp and plunge moves, just in case you need to ramp into your material instead of plunging directly into it. So we can add that option in if you'd like to. Let's go ahead and close this down, and let's quickly add in that profile toolpath that we can go ahead and cut this out with. So we're just going to select that outside vector, go ahead and make a profile toolpath. We'll cut all the way through our material, and we'll just go ahead and calculate that, preview that visible toolpath, and we can delete our waste material, and we have a great sign left over. Okay, let's close this down and let's have a really quick look at the next part of our VCarve toolpath, which is going to cover the start points and selection order. So let's go ahead and turn on that sheet, click into our 3D view here, go to our 2D view, and we're going to see that we have a few shapes here. Let's go back over and open up our VCarve toolpath. So what we're going to do is we are going to choose all of these vectors that are on our screen right now. We're going to have a start depth of 0. We're going to keep the flat depth of 0.01. We're going to remove this clearance tool because we don't need that. And we're going to go ahead and calculate this toolpath. And let's have a look at it. So you'll see that the toolpath is going to start at our XY datum here in the bottom left-hand corner. Move into the center. It's going to clear out this shape here, and then it's going to go to this shape and go to this shape, and then it'll finish up. Now, in most cases, that's probably going to be okay, but if you would like to have a little bit more control over your toolpath, then you can go ahead and use these settings right here. Use vector start points or use vector selection order. So we're going to go ahead and pop back to our 2D view for a moment. Turn off the solid preview of our tooling, and we'll have a look at these. So if we go into node mode here with these selected, you'll see that these are the start points. In our current toolpath, the software did not respect those start points, but we can force it to if we would like to. So if you think that there's a more optimum way of cutting this toolpath, or for your particular needs, you need to decide or tell the software where you'd like it to start, then you can go ahead and use your start points. Also, the vector selection order, that may also impact how your job cuts. So right now, it's going to go ahead and randomly choose the shapes that it feels are going to be the best to make an optimal toolpath for you. But if you want control over that, then you use this dialog here, and the software will respect the order that you select your vectors in. Now let's have a quick look at this project toolpath onto a 3D model. Let's have a quick look at the toolpaths that we already have set up. So we have a very basic roughing, a finishing, and a profile cut. Let's just go ahead and preview those toolpaths very quickly. And let's say we'd like to actually put some text right on the curved surface of this football. So So what we can do is go back to our 2D view. We can grab that text. We can go over to our Toolpaths tab here, bring up our VCarve toolpath. We're going to go ahead and use a start depth of 0. We're not going to use any flat depth at all. We're going to use that 60-degree V-bit. We're going to not use that clearance tool, and then we're going to go ahead and calculate that toolpath. And you'll see that right now that toolpath is actually floating above the surface of our job, and it's not wrapping around the surface of that football. So what we can do is go back into that toolpath again, and we can project that onto our 3D model, and we can select calculate, and you'll see that now it's actually resting right on the surface of that football, and we can preview that visible toolpath, and there we have it. So if you ever want to actually project your VCarving toolpath onto a 3D component, make sure that you make use of that option right here, project your toolpath onto a 3D model. And with that, we've pretty much covered every different tool that we have available in our VCarve toolpath form. If you're looking for a little bit more help, please go ahead and take a moment and look at our help file. If you'd like a little bit more information on how to use more clearance tools, then please look at the related video called How to Use the Pocket Toolpath. If you'd like a little bit more information on how to cut a 3D component, then also leave a related video for that as well. I hope that you now have a better idea of how to use the VCarve toolpath in your projects.